So it's amazing to virtually meet you, Zeyad, after reading your very powerful debut, City on Fire. Thank you for taking time out for a chat on Harper Podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
So,
much, Amrita.
your book, and the subtitle is A Boyhood in Aligarh. I want to ask you, there are so many strands in this, that are relevant to contemporary India, that are relevant to, of course, historical India as well. And then, we'll talk more about the sociopolitics globally, potentially. What actually led you to write this book? And it's fascinating, you were saying, that this kernel actually came to you during the pandemic, that you wanted to write this book.
So I do think that pandemic was in my, pandemic was a very, very important factor in this. So also this was a very, very complicated time because Delhi riot had just happened. Delhi riots had just happened, and then there was during the pandemic there was two, like a witch hunting of Tablighi Jamaat which was going on at that point as well. So I do think that even like all of these are political things, but I do think that in the lot of pop culture and even in our general discourse, I did feel that the idea of Muslims is being very, very dehumanized, like it is, the pop culture and pop art and even many, in many ways, literature and academia, when they talk about Muslims, it is sometimes seen as a problem community or something that need to be sorted out. So that was something that I had been thinking for a long time. And one of that was one of the reasons that I that was one of the triggers for me to write a book. I have been thinking about writing this book about Aligarh and my experiences in Aligarh of growing up amid violence for since around 2015. But I do think that pandemic and before the Delhi riots and even what was the media narrative during that time, like all of those things that Muslims are deliberately spreading COVID. I
Hmm.
did feel that at this point when I do not also talk about even as a Muslim. I do talk about as an Indian. That
Yeah.
a community, like if it was Dalits or anybody else or any group who are being dehumanized. So at that point, it's very, very important to reclaim your humanity. You
Yeah.
know, and that point. So I do talk about. It's very difficult to explain to somebody where you're coming from, even in 2024. So
Hmm.
I did think that this idea, that like Muslim ghettos are a problem place. They are some a place where criminals live. Even a lot of elite Muslims also think that it is a kind of place where people who are anti-nationals or people who are criminals or people who don't deserve the equal rights as a citizens, they live. But in many ways I do think that people, those who live in ghettos, they have rich inner lives as anybody else. Somebody who lives in a very posh apartment or a locality, they have the same sometimes I do feel more rich inner lives as well. Like there is humor, there is too much of community and all of those things. So I did think at this point, talking about violence without reducing it to a left right binary or a Hindu Muslim, it's just about telling a story how it was, with all the nuances and all the darkness and all the complexities that is the human life. I did think that was something I
No,
thought when I wrote,
it's
wrote the book.
is really well done. I think this is a book that will stay with people. I think you also bring in a lot of humor. I think there's a lot of honesty when you're looking at um, some of the stories you tell as a child. Now, there's some very big topics. Obviously, you're talking about riots. You're talking about communal tension. You're talking about how Hindus and Muslims who are neighbors, and there are a couple of incidents you talk about. For example, when it's actual neighbors, or there's a shopkeeper's grandson who's identifying you as a Muslim on a bus, and then you kind of have to go back to life as normal after a couple of weeks. Can you tell us a little bit about incidents like that? Because one is living it, and then two is
Mm-hmm.
unpacking it, writing about it, thinking about it. What does that actually mean? And it really strikes me, as you say, there's no, sometimes in our media narratives, there's no space for nuance, right? There's the good guys and
Yes,
the bad
sure,
guys.
sure, 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 sure.
Tell us
So,
a little bit about
so one thing that that as a journalist who has reported on conflicts from both sides, Like I could not, like even among most, there is always one us and the other, you know and like I do feel that even among everybody, with most of the people. So like I did not wanted to demonize Hindus, because I can see the complexities. There is too much politics, there is so much of human greed, powerful people involved in leading to these violence. So it was just that these people are not naturally bad, so like I have had experiences where like somebody so when I talk about people who are writers, people who have who were at that moment thinking of violence against Muslims, but they have other sides too, you know, and that is where the complexities is. Some of these people who sometimes indulge in violence against a oppressed group or a minority or even women or Dalits, they have in their perspective they are nice people just going back to their families as well. So that is something that Helen that Hannah Arendt talk about, banality of evil. So if there is if like if I'm talking about breaking those binaries, I will have to address those issues without creating more binaries, you know so yeah, like at one point in the book I talk about how my school bus was stopped when I was in school, and a neighbor pointed me out. Okay, this is a Muslim, and this person knew me, and in many ways, it was very funny also. At some point, if I am get out of here alive, you will see me walking in those roads, you will see me talking to you, but at that moment, that kind of those kinds of fears were absent from that person. So that is something that I was interested in. uh, and so it is like, I do think the violence is not does not emerge from people who live in the grassroots. I do not see people who live on the in the Hindu locality are bad people, but at the same time there is greed, and like this greed, this is that kind of greed which which creates a mob mostly. So like it will be there will be somebody who will have a sinister interest, like somebody wants a political power, somebody wants to get the house of a Muslim who are living in that locality for a cheaper price, and that person will assemble people on the pretext of saving the religion, you know so these are the issues which needs to be talked about more, you know and why is, if there is violence, and when I see, even you think about internationally, if there is a violence so there is somebody who's getting a benefit out of it. There's always a strategic interest which is that is involved. So I wanted to talk about those things. Of course, like anybody who humiliates another person, who picks up a sword or a gun, they have to be answered. They have to answer for their crimes. I was thinking of, like there was a Dalit person who became the face of 2002 Gujarat riots, and that person, is now, he says that I wasn't aware of these things, and now he campaigns against communalism. You know, so India has all of these complexities. You cannot see just the violence in isolation. So
Yeah.
there is that idea, and also Aligarh and UP. It's not the violence that happens or conflict that Hindus and Muslims have. It's not just always a political thing. You have to also look at these things from a perspective of culture as well. So, are we a society that celebrates violence? I do tend to think that we are becoming that society, and we have been that society. So, like, and that is sometimes like evident in many ways. Like I do see, when I, as a journalist, I see even in a place where a violence has happened, instead of people trying to help that person, there's so many people who will be shooting that thing. you know that's kind of voyeuristic idea of violence. So And even when those towers in Noida went down, there were so many people who had assembled at that place just to
Yeah.
see towers being diminished,
Yeah.
destroyed.
Yeah.
So I do think there is a celebration of violence in our culture as a society, and it's not just about Hindus and Muslims. It's about us as a society. And I do think that as the future of a nation, that where do we want to go? I do think that it is important to talk about these things, and that is the why I try to address that in a non-binary.
No, and it's really well done. I do want to, we'll move to some of the other parts, of course, and the people. Also, your home, your family homes has such a presence in this book. It's a character in itself.
Yeah, you're
Um,
sitting here. I'm sitting there right now.
and which has gone through so many changes, which you talk about again generationally.
Sure, sure, sure.
Before that, I just want to, there's this line, page 67 to 68, where you're talking about communal tension. For those of you who are reading this book, Zayad writes communal tension he sees not as a binary, or he says you don't see it as a binary, but it's actually a spectrum. And the next page, and this is heartbreaking, he says by 7 years of age, you are a veteran. So, anyone listening to this, by 7 years of age, for a child to know when is it actually safe to go out versus when is it somebody who's, you have these descriptions of some people who are quick to panic, who's actually not panicking, who should you take seriously? And that is a childhood that many people would not even recognize as a childhood, right? So, firstly, thank you for sharing that. It is a beautiful piece of writing. It is heartbreaking. When you talk about communal tension as a spectrum and you talk about these kind of frontier areas, right, where you have these kind of the mixed communities, you also talk about how people feel at some point in the book there's a little bit of this feeling that you have to leave those frontier areas, and you have some families who are like, listen, we do have to go to the ghetto for a reason, despite that, the class privilege that you're saying, you're also drawing a light, a shining a light on, rather. You talk about why ghettos become ghettos. Can you share a little bit about this and this idea of this being a spectrum, not a binary?
So like that is a very good question, right? So when we think about violence, mostly I see the conversation is mostly about the number of people who have perished in a conflict, you know. But like like if we, and that is also, some people will be saying 20 people died on this side, and some other, no, the toll is 10 people, the discourse and the debate will be on this. I say, like, even if one person died, you know, like when a one person goes from a family, that person becomes an elephant in the room. Nobody talks about that person, you know, like for years. You know? And like that is how families respond to violence. So like nobody talks about the mental trauma, the psychological trauma, and like even collective trauma that people from the oppressed group feels. That has been internalized in many ways. So like when we talk about violence and when we talk about ghettoization, we need to address those things, that the violence of the mind, you know, like even if somebody is being nice to me, and if there is that idea, okay, like so like you are somebody that we are allowing to live in our land, and you have to be a certain way, there is violence in even that assertion as well. So like ghettos are in many places. When we talk about like why do ghettos arise, and we talk about, okay, this is the problem of the people, I don't see that as problem of the people, I do see that as a systematic problem that needs to be addressed. So like if people were like if there is violence that is taking place from time to time, people will naturally try to tend to live with people of their own community. So so like, and it comes across in little things, and as the polarization between different communities at right now is too much. So like if there is a symbol that somebody is allowing me to live like I am with certain conditions, I do see violence in that as well. And also I also see, like, so when people do not I do see Aligarh, and by extension Ali Uttar Pradesh, and by extension India, like as a country of traumatized people, Aligarh is a city of traumatized people who don't even know, how the trauma is affecting them internally. So it becomes a part of their lives, it becomes a part of whatever they say, and still unaddressed. So I still think like it would take, if therapists get into it, it will take years and decades to unpack all of those things. So why we are why there is polarization, why there is hate between different communities, people always say that, but it is all around us. It is all around us, little thing that we do. uh, so I do think that ghettos are a response to the systematic violence, that happens, and it's not necessarily, a Muslim will not never want to. I also address that Muslim will not want to live in the ghettos. If it was, most of, if you dig deep enough, they will want to live in other places. They will want to live in more cosmopolitan areas. Most of them, not all. I won't claim to ask for every, stand for everybody else, but I do think it's not because of their own choice they are living there. It's because of how the society is making them feel. So that
Hmm.
is what I think, that's where the ghettoization starts. It begins in the mind. uh,
Yeah.
so if there is always, I also say that how, like how society makes you feel, that also becomes a part of your personality. Most of the people, when they react to somebody, they react. They are very reactionary. Humans are have a tendency to be reactionary. So that is how they deal with the violence that is, and I do see that that is on a surge right now. So
Yeah.
many of the people who want to live in mixed localities, they are now moving out to Muslim areas. And well, like, and then there are cases where Hindus don't want Muslims in their areas as well. And like it's very common. Like sometimes people are surprised, like, do Muslims really find it difficult to get a place? But if you ask any Muslim, it's a very common thing. Okay, they say okay, हाँ वहाँ उस एरिया में मकान मिल जाएगा, वहां पर जाकर देख लो, वहां पर वो लोग थोड़े से प्रोग्रेसिव हैं, वहां पर मकान मिल जाएगा. Like this is like a very normal conversation in our lives,
Including in
uh,
Delhi, right? So, you talk
including
about Delhi also, and this is what,
including including
I've
in
heard
Delhi.
from them as well. Yeah.
So I do think like in USA 1970s,
Hmm.
the state effectively intervened, to put black people in the middle of a city,
Hmm.
and there have been documented instances of that, and so that this segregation might end. I do feel the Indian state needs to step in here. Instead of promoting ghettoization, it will come from the state only. They need to reduce these frictions and to make people safe, wherever they want to live. That is what the idea of India was basically. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that is where we need to think in terms of ghettoization, I guess.
So, in this book, you write a lot about how your sense of identity comes in, like how your, everyone in a family has a different approach to religion. You talk very movingly also about your father. You talk about, the kind of things that you sort of try out. I want to ask you specifically, though, because it's such a telling incident when somebody asks you, and you're still a young child at this point in school, who is the person that you look up to, and you say Shah Rukh Khan, and you write later also about how everyone in India was, everyone still loves Shah Rukh, but this teacher kind of just keeps asking you why until you say essentially that he is a Muslim, right? He's a Muslim man, and
Sure.
that's kind of the question. That's the answer she was waiting for, kind of baiting you into saying.
Yeah,
Can you tell
sure,
me
sure.
a little bit about that?
So like there is a incident in my book where I had a argument with a teacher, and I had written an essay. I had to speak about who is my idol, and I said Shah Rukh Khan. And Shah Rukh Khan, for many of the people, and not just Muslims, for everybody, he was a symbol that anybody who comes from a middle class family can, be there, make it big, and transcend those barriers of religion, as he married a person of another religion, and make a name for himself, and become a heartthrob without being reduced to his identity, and that is what most Muslims like struggle with, and I do see in many ways most people struggle with. They are always being reduced to their identity. So Shah Rukh Khan was a symbol that way. I did not know all of those things at that point, but when my teacher asked, I said that I my idol is Shah Rukh Khan because I like him. He's funny. He's a good actor. But um, eventually, the teacher kept asking me, "Why do you actually like him?" I don't know, like she was baiting me that I will talk about the religion because she kind of anticipated that. So like, and then I even said that okay, like I don't know, like I was a kind of polarized child at that. I was a child. Okay, you have to keep that into perspective. So I said, oh, I like him just out of anger. I like it because he's a Muslim. So I do see that incident as an example where many Muslims right now or people are being pushed to to just be their identity. So in a way, the education system and the system in general should promote people to be more themselves, to find their identity outside of the immediate identity that they can be reduced to. But like uh, and that is the idea of the whole education system, like you should break barriers instead of creating new barriers. So in that regards, and I when I look at it, I did not like Shah Rukh Khan because he was a Muslim. I like Shah Rukh Khan because he was so charming, like any other person.
Yeah, yeah.
But when I as a Muslim say that there is an inherent suspicion, okay, like this person is less Indian because he likes somebody because he is a Muslim. So in that comes, like why can't
Yeah.
I be a Muslim and an Indian at the same time?
Exactly, and or it's like, oh, it's obvious, like, it's like you're saying, she's kind of like that. That has to be the reason. It's not because of all of the other reasons everyone loves him, right? It's a very, like you're saying, reducing to one identity, and it's something that I feel we hear from a lot of Muslim intellectuals, for example, that you always have to perform. Like
Yep,
there's
yep, yep, yep.
constantly being asked to perform your identity. There's a lot more in this book to for us to unpack. But let me ask you a little bit about. There's this funny, I don't think we're getting across how funny you are in this book. You're very charming and very funny as a child, and have a sense of humor. You're pranking people constantly. There's a lot of these moments. Also, tell us a little bit about the UK. There's a chapter called the UK. It may not be what
Yeah,
people are
sure. Right now I'm sitting in UK, and so I'm sitting in Upercourt. So it's a Muslim ghetto. It's apart from that thing, apart from that as idea that it's a Muslim ghetto where most people who are Muslim live. It's a very very interesting place, by the way. It has people. It has a Most people have a very very intense, great sense of humor as well. Because and I do also see that as a survival technique because in ghettos, like sometimes most people those because like there is too much abject poverty, there is lack of resources and and lack of movement, social movement as well, social mobility as well. So at those points the communities tend to draw more to humor. So and but also there is a lot of denial which I make a lot of fun about. So like everybody, like every human, okay, they believe that what they're doing and what their locality and their community is the best. So even in a ghetto they are talking about, oh, like we are so like if you go to those residential colonies and know what happened to these rich people, they get robbed, there is so much crime there, and their children leave them and go away, so all of those things. So in a way I find that denial very very humorous. So also there is like and even like and that is also not it's a part of Aligarh, like, and that is something also which I think that keeps the city going. Okay, after there are some very problematic jokes that even as a child I used to share with my Hindu neighbors. Okay, like like the violence has happened and Aligarh in its very very Aligarhi way you'll talk about, okay, यार when अगली बार जब राइट होगा तो मैं तुझे देख लूंगा, ज्यादा तमीज से रहे, all of those things. So we will address these issues in very humorous way and they will say the same thing. So this idea that we are different was not so taboo. you know and of course there was violence, but people will get over it through these people have to communicate to the other people to have live a life. So and so it I found it very funny कि भाई कि लड़ाई के टाइम पर तो आप हमारे दुश्मन हो, बाकी आप दोस्त दोस्त कर रहे हो, मतलब आप हमारे घर पर आ रहे हो एंड मैं उनके घर पर जा रहा हूँ. So I found that very funny and ironic at the same time, and that is I use irony a lot of times in the book, you know, And that is because Indian life is very very ironic in all its use. I do think why South Asians are one of the most ironic people in the whole world. They will say one thing and they will practice other thing. So like
Yeah.
even when we say that we are a hateful society, or like when there are so many people who actively say that, you know who like we are okay, we don't want the other community to live among us, they will have Muslim friends, you know and Muslims will, who are very very communal, or they will say, but at the end of the day they will go back to their Hindu friends and talk about these things. So I find that really really ironical, and how do they maneuver the realities of the country. So I do think that as a sort of resilience and the resistance against the political people who play politics out of it. And I just think that I find UK very very interesting place. I do find like you know for like in many places Muslim ghettos are always looked at as, ओ भाई क्या पता नहीं किस तरह के लोग रह रहे होंगे मिनी पाकिस्तान और पता नहीं एंटी नेशनल, but when you look at it they are very very Indian. If you scratch the surface, they will be as much Indian as they are. They just believe in a different religion. So that is
Yeah.
what I try to bring, that mundaneness of the life through my
Yeah,
writing.
and
That was the
it's beautifully
intention.
done because even your generational stuff. And I have to ask you,
Yeah.
as a good Indian, you have actually there's a lot of family stuff you put in. So I don't know how your
Yeah.
I will ask you about how your family's reacted to some of it. But your home where you are right now, that is also a character in the book. You will tell us a little bit of the history and how it's of course changed. You talk about that. It's a very moving, description also about what that change actually means. Yeah, including to the older people who've seen it from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about it's Farsh Manzil, right?
Sure,
Farsh
sure.
Manzil.
So I'm right now sitting in first manzil, and so yeah, like I also see, like this home as was built by my grandfather. It's more than 100 years old. It was built uh, uh, by my grandfather when even the idea of separate nation had even born. You know, so he built this for his children, generations and generations of children who will live there. So but yeah, like but during the partition, like like four of his sons, they moved out to Pakistan. Two of his sons remained here. Me, my father and my uncle. So like and my father, he was very very attached to this home, you know and somehow I inherit this sense of love for my home from him. uh, in and this home, it's not just I don't know, like I find these old homes, these rustic area, localities and homes very very beautiful, because they allow the elements of nature to come into your home. I can just There is so much sunlight. My home has, if I can show you, there is just so many windows. So I do think that such homes also include that idea of Indianness, of community. Like there is a separate sitting area, there are open areas where people can just sit for nothing you know and I do feel that, like, even how the architecture has been changing, that is also affecting how people are becoming you know so like if people live in these, where people do live in places where they have open spaces, they will be a different, they will have a different idea of outlook of life. If people
Yeah.
live in apartment when there is no sunlight,
Yeah.
all of those things will affect. And also this idea that this home is also a symbol to me that my father was he chose to live in India. He was not forced to live in India. Most of his brothers, they wanted him to go to migrate to Pakistan as well, but he chose to live here. He was in love with his home. And I do think when I talk to most Muslims, even with what is happening in the country, there is this love for the home, which is India. you know like the politics is something else, but this love for the land, this love for the home, it is very, that has been captured by literature by so many great writers. कहते हैं ना मिट्टी की खुशबू. you know at some point, probably people of our generation might not identify with these, But I, all my relatives, all my uncles who were in Pakistan, they always just kept dreaming about coming back to India, you know. And that is the story of a nation. And I do think in a way, my home, which is an old home, ruining home, it represents the idea of India in many ways. The people have moved out and they still want that old peaceful place in their heart, but they don't know how to get back to it.
Which had space for everyone also. That's a beautiful
which was
metaphor.
which
It
which
had.
which has space for everyone. And like my father, like in a way, like how the politics has changed, my father never thought of his friends as Hindus or Muslims. They are his friends. They come here and they are, and he will have, and he will have arguments with them even on very, very sensitive issues that people of our generation cannot even dream of having those
Yeah.
arguments. That sense of openness. So I do feel that my home with its open architecture also encourage that kind of openness in arguments. So I do think the architects, people who create buildings and homes, they should keep these things in mind as well. It
Yeah, and we
affects
don't.
our journey.
You're right. We don't talk enough about what the built environment, the influence it's having on you day to day. The kind of, like you said, it has an impact on your behavior, your mood, almost
Yeah, yeah,
everything.
totally, totally. Like I will add something to it. So like when I go to Noida, okay, or when I go to Delhi, so people who live in very posh colonies, which are very, very organized, they will be different for people who were living in a slightly unorganized places. Let's say Humayunpur will be very different from Noida, okay, and Old Delhi, the vibe will be very different from, let's say Defense Colony.
Yeah.
So like how we are, geography where we are, it affects us so much that we have only begun to scratch it. So when, like, one of the things that I also see that many of the things that I cannot deny, I hated some aspects of Aligarh in me when I moved to Delhi. As somebody, okay, like Aligarh is conservative, Aligarh is still lost in its own old ideas. But in a way, I do see that, but because I come from here, there is no way I can erase that belonging from here, you know. And if I erase that belongingness from Aligarh, then I'm from nowhere, basically. So that is also the idea of reclaiming your identity.
Yeah. And also, you talk about, there's so much growth in the book, right? The way you actually describe your own evolution as a human being. Obviously, as you're growing up, it is a coming of age also, right? So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed reading that and seeing that arc. Tell us a little bit about comic books, because I love that bit where, as a child, you go from having not so much interest in the academic subjects to acing to becoming a class topper, and you credit
Yeah.
it to books and your love for comics.
Oh, yeah, I do think that that's beautiful. That is something a very, very beautiful part of my life. That still myself I look at very fondly. So comic books were my window to the world. You know. So when somebody, like, because when you live in a place where there are only people from a certain or people are nearly the same. So like comic books opened an idea that which has such diverse stories. You know Comic books also, for I was very afraid of Hindus as a child, because they were right. So when the comic books also, but there was so much love for comic books that I had to venture to Hindu areas to get my comic books. So in that way, before, and I said I used to buy that comic book, and that guy was really nice, and I was like, यार ये लोग तो पता नहीं क्या क्या कहते हैं, ऐसा होता है, डरो मत जाओ, तुम्हें मार देंगे, है ना, और ये लड़का तो बहुत अच्छा है. So that is there this kind of irony, okay, like this person is not inherently violent or evil, and that is something that most people who otherize the other community need to understand, and not most people are not inherently evil. It is the political system that makes them. But yeah, so like that comic books, I used to live at his place at some point. I used to there. I did not tell my mother that I used to read at his shop for hours. You know, and at some point his family was familiar, started getting familiar to me. They will offer me food, they will offer me water, and then they used to think this is a crazy kid. Okay, yeah, like what kind of a crazy kid is he? Like he will come here even in the times of when there's tension. communal tension. So they were very nice to me, and I do think that is that broadened my horizon. And in many ways, comic books, also gave me a window to the world. There are superheroes who trying to do the right things, and fighting their own demons, fighting bad people. So I do think that sense of doing what's right, what's moral, that also comes from comic books as well, you know uh, and so I do see, like, so most of the people are still caught up in that stage, which I actually evolved as a child. I don't know, like, like that, the other is the bad, no, not the other is not the bad. There are good people and bad people everywhere, and that is a very, very simple truth that most people need to understand. Okay, it's not about which community you come from. It's not about which part of the country, that it's about what you do. It's about what you do. There are good Muslims, there are bad Muslims, there are good Hindus and bad Hindus. There are good Indians, bad Indians, bad Chinese, good Chinese.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very simple fact that needs to be, let's say, drilled into our ideas. And like, and for that, literature is the best medium. Sadly, because media doesn't do its job that effectively. I will say that.
Yeah,
It
you got to
creates
this.
those binaries. It creates those
Yeah.
binaries. It is only literature which breaks these binaries.
Yeah, I think
It's
the problem with media is because of the framing, right? Constantly, and you're looking for headlines, and you're not able to actually get to the. This is the tragedy of a profession that I used to love as well. Once, literature does this. I was also reading. There was a study that said, it reading actually, interestingly, fiction and comics would come in there also. Like, it expands
yeah.
empathy. So those kind of things. So let me ask you a little bit. There's a bit also about how you get into gaming, and then you do talk about your family as well. So right now, you mentioned your mother didn't know that you were going to these areas. She would obviously have been concerned for your safety, maybe more than that you were sitting and reading
Mm,
comics all
mm,
day in these shops. In the gaming bit, she actually comes and finds you, and I think she just brings you home.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
tell us a little bit about your family now. I am so sorry to learn of your, we read about your father passing away. I'm sorry for your loss there as well. And how is the family dynamic changed? How has your family reacted to this book, brother, sister,
Yeah.
relatives? Because you also, you do share, and presumably they knew you were writing this book. Your friends as well.
Mhm.
What have some of the reactions been?
So, like, when I was writing this book, and I do think that it's a complicated book that talks about different issues through my own life, I was very afraid, you know. It's a sensitive topic. And, how will my family react? How will my Hindu friends react? How will my Muslim friends react when I talk about Aligarh in a certain way? But very strangely, Amrita, and very surprisingly, I've only got love because of it, from all quarters, and even from people who are not traditionally readers, from first time readers. There are so many people, those who are reading it in, in Aligarh and in other places, like somebody's dadi is reading it, somebody's nephew is reading it, somebody, a 6 7 year old who understands English somehow is
Hmm.
reading it. So, and it's a very, and everybody is finding their own interpretations to like it.
That's lovely.
You and
That's beautiful.
that is something that I, that is strangely comforting and surprising, because when I was writing it, I was very afraid. I was in fact anticipating that everybody will dislike it. Okay, they will find that it's important and talks about important issues, but they will dislike it. But for my surprise, even people, those who I thought, might have a problem with it, even they are fine with it, because I do think people sense that kind of, like, I'm trying to telling this story with honesty. There is no, I try to cut, reduce, or as much as I can, the hypocrisy of the let's say, the progressive discourse, which doesn't address religion as a thing, and
Yeah.
most people, like, and I have got so much love from, from all sectors. And like, even I was very afraid, how will people in Aligarh react to it, because,
Yeah.
they are very, very, most of, they have been very, very sensitive of any portrayal of Aligarh, and they're like, ha, sahi hai. So one, that is, I see that as a victory, victory of humor, you know like, and that is what very Indian. You can say anything in a fun way. You can talk
Yeah.
about complicated things in a fun way, and everybody will react. And if you're, if not trying to disrespectful towards anybody. So The reactions, yeah, some people, like there have been, like many people, let's say, like a reaction that people those who are comes from it is also very, if you could see, it's also very anti-elitist in many ways, so there have been reactions from that, like uh, like it does talk about, like, let's say, victimhood, so that has been the only thing that I've got, but it's not about Hindus and Muslims, it's about the class thing. And and even, and I don't understand this idea of victimhood, because I do think, and it's a very very recent phenomena that people talk about these, like, why can't a victim, or a, let's say, when it's the same thing which tells a, a girl who's walking in shorter clothes, that it's your fault if you get assaulted, you know people should talk about their tragedies, people should talk about their miseries without needing to justify that, like, that they have the right to talk about it.
Yeah,
That is gaslighting, I'm,
yeah,
like, so why can't a victim be very very confident of telling their stories where they are a victim? So I do sense that, that's only from a very few quarters that I have found this, but I do feel that, most people, even Aligarh first time readers, they have given so much. Some people are not even understanding the political; they are just reading it as an interesting story of a boy. They are more interested in the humor
right.
aspect. They
Yeah.
Many of the people have completely missed the political context as well. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, you're right, because you could read it just as a coming of age story of this young man,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the most beautiful thing is that, it has cut across that, that, like, like people, those who are intellectuals and really, who read, or are people come from a literary background, they're reading it from a very very different point of view. But
Yeah,
people who are, like, who live in a league or live in a Muslim ghetto or a Hindu ghetto, they find that, okay, like, he's telling stories of people like us, you know
yeah.
okay, and everybody has told me that they have related to it in some way, and I do see that I never anticipated that is surprising.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And that is like the power, like you said, the honesty, the humor, actually telling a story without trying to, gloss over certain things. So let me ask you a little bit about just a couple more questions for this interview, for this podcast. What are some of the books you like reading? What, I mean, do you still read comics? Who are some of the influences you would say for for an adult you?
So, like, for this, so I do read a lot of philosophy, you know and I do read a lot of literature by people from, let's say, feminist writers, people who come from oppressed groups, basically. I love some of my favorite writers, in this is Vivian Gornick, who wrote Fierce Attachments. She wrote a memoir of growing up as a woman in a US small town, and that's a beautifully written book. She's a feminist writer, amazing, amazing. I I am a very big fan of James Baldwin, and how he address, the issues of race in a very very, at the same time, in a way which is angry and serious and empathetic at the same time. You know I do read, like, in academics. Like, even Basharat Peer's book Curfewed Night. I like that. There are other memoirs that I read. Two are my friends. Niaz Faruqi's memoir of growing up. Of his experiences in Batla House during the Batla House encounter. There's Manjiri and Durkar's book. It's all about. It's all in your head. So I read a lot of contemporary memoirs. I read a lot of older books as well. Also I read a lot of, trying to decipher the violence that is happening in our times. So I read a lot of Hannah Arendt, and Michel Foucault is very very important person who, he writes about the, power, the dynamics of power. So I do think, like, I read from a very very wide, I still read comic books. I still sometimes I still read some books and watch cinema which is considered slightly trashy to understand what people are reading. People are enjoying, and it's always important to read pop culture. I see
Yeah.
of you I see still see my comic book fascination has shifted to Marvel movies, and I do know like that come very strange for an author to say in a podcast, but I still see all those superhero
Kind of.
movies that are my
Yeah.
guilty pleasures, and I still do read comic books. Watchmen is one of my very
That
favorite.
is that's a classic.
Even something like a Persepolis,
Yeah.
that is a graphic novel
Yeah.
that's still a comic book that
Yeah.
still addresses very larger issues. So
Yeah.
I do read, especially from people from marginalized communities from across the world, and it's not only Muslims. It's blacks, whoever are marginalized in their own respective circles. So because I do think they will bring that element of, let's say, that element of resilience in many ways that I talk about. Like, I wouldn't have been able to complete this book if it was not for my neighbors, you know just carrying on with their work during the times of the pandemic. when i
Hmm.
was when i was when I was full of self doubt, I will take a walk in my lanes. I will see a worker sitting in his workshop and just doing his work with so much love. So, you always get inspired to work, you know, so to labor. So that is where this comes from, I guess.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I don't know if you have any last thoughts on, I mean, is anything you're working on now? Or, you're a journalist also, you're also a documentary filmmaker and a writer. Are you comfortable with all three identities? Is there anything you're
Yeah,
working on you'd want to share?
sure. Sure, like I don't know, like I do think I am thinking of further books, but right now there's nothing has been formalized as of yet. But I do think there is a lot of scope in like what I talk about rehumanization of oppressed communities. Reclaiming your humanity. So, like I do realize that most of my work will be in that realm. It can be a Dalit person. You know, without reducing them to their identity. A woman, of course, like these people should write about their own identity. But I do think this, whatever I do, like in my documentary films, in my pieces, if anybody would want to read them, my pieces for Vice and Reuters, there is always this element that people are just people. You cannot put them into boxes, and and you need to be empathetic to their sufferings. When somebody talks about them, you should listen. so so
Yeah.
I want, like, at a time when, especially because as a Muslim, I do feel there is a lot of dehumanization of Muslims right now in pop art, even in films, let's say. I see a lot of cinema on these OTTs, which is, all, like, let's say 30% of their content is Islamophobic. So at this point, when corporates are making money out of dehumanization of a community, it is very important for writers who do believe that they are on the right side of history to reclaim these narratives by humanizing the people, those who are weaker than them. So I do think, not just as a Muslim, but as a human being, we should talk about humanizing less privileged people. So that is what my work will always be about. And I will, like, when that those things get formalized, I will let you know more about that. But I
We
want
would
to
love,
write.
and more power to your pen, more power to you. And definitely recommend your book to anyone listening. City on Fire, Boyhood in Aligarh. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Ziyad, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for writing what you're writing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amrita. Hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you. You too.